In 1933, there was a coup to overthrow the United States government, but it failed. Ringleaders behind this coup were representatives of the J.P. Morgan administration, the DuPont family, Remington Arms, and there was an anti-New Deal administration called the American Liberty League. The goal was to have 500,000 World War I veterans under the leadership of Smedley Butler, the most decorated Marine in U.S. history at the time, who was also a retired general. Let me give you some background about all this. In 1929, we had the great stock market crash, which eventually helped lead to the Great Depression, which was the worst economic disaster that Americans have ever witnessed. President at the time, Herbert Clark Hoover, was not even leading this country for a year when the Great Depression hit. Before recently, he was looked upon as one of the worst presidents that the United States has ever had. But that's not really true. Hoover stands accused of not intervening at all or nowhere near enough in order to fix the U.S. economy given the horrendous disaster it was facing. But he actually did, and it infuriated the wealthy and the industrialists of the country because they wanted the economy to take care of itself while he wanted to start funding what needed to be funded. Look at the chart of federal spending from 1929 up until 1934 when FDR stepped into office. He actually started upping it, especially between 1931 and 1932. It may not have been enough, but he was facing a lot of conservative and wealthy resistance at the time. What made the Depression so horrible is that prices across the board were dropping. And yeah, that does sound like a dream if you have money. But guess what was falling even further than prices? Workers' wages. So wages dropped by almost 50% in about 4 years, and unemployment got up to 25%. So everybody was broke, and anyone who was working was near broke. Because food prices were crashing across the board, that meant that farmers were suffering. So he set up the Federal Farm Board to try to prop up some prices and make sure that farmers could get loans. But it didn't work because the loans and subsidies actually encouraged the farmers to grow more. More supply equals less demand, so food prices crashed even further. President Hoover aggressively fought to keep workers' wages high, even though the big money wanted to start lowering those wages to make sure they could match the falling prices. Hoover had some solid logic, thinking that, hey, if people have livable wages, they can have purchasing power. But the big money just said, okay, fine, we'll keep wages at a certain level, but we're just going to fire even more people. And that's exactly what happened. It's one of the things that contributed to more unemployment. Eventually, wages did fall and unemployment just kept skyrocketing. Another aggressive intervention by the Hoover administration was shutting down the borders and making sure we did not take in any more immigrants. In fact, we started deporting people thinking that that would create more American jobs, but it actually hurt the economy even more. Unfortunately, due to the loss of entrepreneurship that immigrants provide, the areas that witnessed a mass exodus of immigrants had an even higher spike of unemployment than the national average. Another major intervention of the Hoover administration, even though it was a horrendous mistake, was the signing in of the Smoot-Hawley tariff in 1930. Smoot-Hawley tariffed every single import that America brought in, thinking that, okay, Americans will start paying for cheaper American-made products than European or Asian products that have a higher price. What they didn't account for was that every country that was tariffed by America would just start tariffing American products. And that led to a major collapse in international trade. So these measures, which Hoover tried to implement to fix the economy, ended up making things only worse. And of course, it infuriated the business interests because they wanted the market to be free to correct itself. Or like they just wanted to control the economy to make it do what they wanted it to do. But he kind of messed it up too, because he thought if he was going to increase federal spending, then he needed to balance the budget. So he ended up raising taxes, and that made matters so much worse too. And here comes FDR, one of the wealthy elite, who says we need to take away even more power from the wealthy and we have to have the federal government intervene even more in business. It was too much for the moneyed interests in this country to endure, so they started to build an army and they wanted to find the best general that they could, and they found that in Smedley Butler. But his replacement, in case he did not want to go through with it, was, believe it or not, Douglas MacArthur. You see, in 1932, a bunch of World War I veterans got together, and I mean thousands of them, went to Washington to protest the government not intervening enough and try to fix the economy. And the American people thought, wow, the government has to listen because these men honorably served their country and they're speaking up for us. But no, Douglas MacArthur led his forces to beat and tear gas these honorable men. Thank goodness that Smedley Butler was a much more honorable man and a true patriot. Because when the moneyed interests came to him and told him of their plans, he went straight to Congress and testified. A committee was formed. Of course, an investigation was launched, but everyone involved in the plot, at least the very wealthy people, denied it, and they faced no repercussions. But it was published in the New York Times and other major journals saying, hey, we almost had a fascist overthrow. You might be asking, are there parallels between now and the Great Depression? Economically, no, because the Great Depression was hell on earth compared to what we're dealing with today. But other parallels are a little difficult to dismiss. I am the Geo Husar, and those who don't follow history are bound to repeat it. Thanks for watching.